Hi guys, I'm Kim and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for clicking on this video today. I'm here today to talk you through our ultimate 5-week New Zealand road trip adventure. So if that's something that interests you, make sure you stick around. So originally we started planning this trip in 2019 and we planned on going to New Zealand for 3 weeks in May to early June 2020. Now we all know what happened in 2020, let's not talk about that. Needless to say, we didn't end up getting to New Zealand. However, in 2021, we heard rumours of a potential trans-Tasman travel bubble between Australia and New Zealand. So around November, December 2020, I started to put some bookings and things back in place. And I'm going to talk you through our exact itinerary. So little did we know how lucky we actually got being able to go on this trip. The window of the travel bubble only ended up being open for 2 months and we squeezed our 5 weeks right in the middle of that. And then the border completely shut at the end of June and it did not open again until April 2022. So I'm going to talk you through the itinerary day by day, where we stayed and what we did. And then at the end of it, I'm going to give you a breakdown of the costs and what we actually spent in each individual category. So on day one, we flew from Adelaide direct into Auckland. And that night we stayed at the IBIS airport hotel because we had to pick up a rental car the next day. So we didn't do anything crazy that day. By the time we got back in and got through all of like the COVID customs stuff and bits and pieces like that, we were pretty tired and anxious after not knowing whether or not we were actually going to be able to be able to be let into the country, which we were, fortunately. On day two, the next morning, we got up, had some breakfast, and we went to the Apex car rental and we picked our little Toyota Corolla up for the 32 days that were going to be ahead of us. Now, when we booked this car, we included the ferry pricing into the booking, so we didn't have to go and book a separate ferry crossing ticket to get the car over. We didn't have to worry about getting another car when we got to the South Island. We just had the same car for the whole trip. So after we picked up the car, we headed up to the Bay of Islands, specifically Kerikeri. My husband has family up there that we were fortunate enough to be able to stay with. So that definitely saved us some accommodation money along the way. Now on day 3, we had a pretty exciting tour booked. We were flying on a small passenger plane up to Cape Reinga. This flight left from the Kerikeri airport and was only an hour flight to get up there, opposed to a 3.5 hour drive if we had have gone that way. But due to only being up there for a limited time, we thought that splashing a little bit of extra cash on the flight was the way to go so we could get to see more in a short period of time. So while we were up in Cape Reinga, we went to the lighthouse and we also got to go to the giant sand dunes. Now the lighthouse is the northernmost point in New Zealand and we had a really nice time up there. It was very windy and it was quite chilly. Nevertheless, it was absolutely gorgeous and beautiful views. This is also the point where the Tasman and the Pacific Oceans meet. And apparently we didn't actually get to see it, but on a good day you can actually see the two oceans crashing together. This tour also included a little bit of a lunch, so we were able to go and sit at a picnic bench and have some muffins and a little bit of tea and coffee by the beach, and it was really lovely. And then we hopped on the plane and we flew back to Kerikeri. After this, we got back in our car and we drove down to the Waitangi Treaty Grounds and we went and had a look at the museum and we wandered around the grounds. We saw the treaty house, we went and saw the canoe, we walked through the gardens, and it was really interesting to learn about some of the Maori history. We also went and had a little bit of a look and a drive around Paihia. That night we went out for dinner with family and had a few drinks and some burgers and just a really nice catch up with everybody. The next day we headed out for a quick 10-minute drive away from where we were staying to a place called Rainbow Falls, to this absolutely gorgeous waterfall, and we walked down the trail and just, really took in the scenery. It wasn't the best weather, so we weren't able to go out and about and explore as much as we wanted to, and we also had a 5.5 hour drive ahead of us. So after we'd finished at the falls, we got in our car, packed everything up, and we started the trip to Waitomo. Waitomo was somewhere that was on my must-go list, and it was a non-negotiable for me when we were planning a trip to New Zealand, because I'd always wanted to go to the glowworm caves. So we arrived at Waitomo quite late that evening, as like I said, it was a 5.5 hour drive and it was 431 kilometers. That night we stayed in a cabin at the Waitomo Top 10 Caravan Park, and it was actually a really quaint, cute little place, and it had a nice little view from the cabin. We also had dinner at the Huhu Cafe that night, and it was really tasty, and that's where I had my first taste of New Zealand fish and chips. On day 5, I'd booked a tour of the glowworm caves. So we ended up going through the Spellbound company. There were quite a few options, but I picked the Spellbound one because it seemed to have the best reviews, and you got to spend the most amount of time in the actual cave. It gave your eyes time to adjust. So it was really worth it. We had the most amazing tour guide, and it was the most magical and best experience. It wasn't really something you could capture on film or camera, and regardless, you're not actually allowed to use flash photography or anything like that in there anyway, but 110% would recommend this experience. It was amazing, and when I go back one day, it's definitely something I'll be doing again. So we did the glowworm caves in the morning, and then the next thing we did was get in the car and we headed to Lake Taupo. This was a 2-hour drive, or approximately 150 kilometers. We ended up staying at the Hilton Hotel at Lake Taupo, and it was an absolutely beautiful facility. We got an amazing room that had a gorgeous view of the lake, and also had a bathtub, a big bed, and room service. While we were staying in Taupo, we went and checked out Huka Falls. We also went down and took some photos with the iconic #LoveTaupo sign. It was really cool to actually see in person after watching other people's videos and vlogs on it. To actually be there and see it was just amazing, and the lake was so beautiful. And right next to it was the hole-in-one, which is like a golf thing where you hit golf balls onto a pontoon that's out in the lake. So Ben had quite a few goes at this and had a lot of fun. We also went out and did I think about a half-hour walk through the Wariki Thermal Park. This was absolutely amazing. It was a little bit tricky to find, and it felt a little bit sketchy going to it, but once you got there and you were walking through it and you could see the geysers and all of like the thermal steam coming up from the ground, it was such a cool experience. And it wasn't overly packed with tourists, as you would expect, because there was really no tourists over there at that time. So on day 6, we drove from Lake Taupo to Rotorua. This was only an hour drive, or approximately 80 kilometers. On our way there, we decided to stop in at the Blue Pools, which were absolutely stunning. I will put some pictures of them in here because I had never heard of them before. And when I heard about them, I knew that I wanted to see them. And the water is so still, and there's these amazing pops of bright blues and this gorgeous like green reed, and it's just so serene and beautiful. You park on the side of the road and you walk for about 10 minutes, and then you kind of go over this little peak and you get to this absolutely stunning scenery. Now, after we finished up at the Blue Pools, we headed to the Hobbiton movie set. So I had never seen the Hobbiton or Lord of the Rings movies before until I knew we were going to New Zealand. And when I knew we were going, I made sure I watched them because I knew that I really wanted to go and do a tour of the Hobbiton movie set. And I'm so glad I did, because it was so cool and exciting to actually stand and be in the scenes of the places that I'd seen in the movies on TV. And we actually visited quite a few of these locations in New Zealand while we were on the holiday. We got really lucky when we were doing this tour. It was raining all the way while we were driving there, and I was really afraid that we were going to be having to do this tour in the rain. It rained on the bus ride out to the Shire, but as soon as we pulled up and got out the bus, the rain just stopped. So we got out, we went on our tour, we walked around Hobbiton, the whole set, for about an hour, and then we went down to the Green Dragon Hotel and we had something to eat and a drink. And while we were inside, it started pouring down again, and then the moment that the lady said that the tour was about to finish and we had to start heading up the park, the rain stopped and we got to the bus and it started raining again. So the whole time we were outside, we got so lucky and we didn't have to actually deal with the rain during the tour. So after we finished at Hobbiton, we headed to our accommodation for the night and we stayed at the King on Peace apartments. These were absolutely gorgeous, would highly recommend. We had a spa tub outside, there was a barbecue, it had, what did it have, like a kitchenette, it had its own laundry, two toilets, it was absolutely gorgeous. And that night we went to dinner at a place called Lone Star, which I believe is a bit of a franchise over there, and it was like your ribs and schnitzel, like kind of American style food, and it was absolutely delicious and we really enjoyed ourselves. So the next day was day 7. I had all these huge plans and big intentions. We were going to go to the Skyline Gondola, we were going to do the luge, we were going to go zip lining, we were going to go and see the Waitomo Thermal Wonderland, we were going to go to the Polynesian spas. I had all this amazing stuff planned. And then because of COVID, everything was either shut or under renovation. So we ended up having to improvise and we went to the Redwood Treetop Walk. And this was absolutely spectacular. It's all these amazing redwood trees with these suspended swing bridges between them that you walk through and you're right up there with the treetops. And it was such an amazing experience and I definitely want to go back there again one day. So after we finished in Rotorua, the next stop was Mount Maunganui. This was a 2-hour drive or 150 kilometers. We arrived pretty late in the afternoon, so we got to our accommodation. We ended up staying at this little apartments called Capri on Pilot Bay. We had a small drive around the area and then we went out for dinner at a place called Kong Chau. The next day, which was day 8, it was still miserable weather and it was really windy. We went for a walk along the beach and we had a look at the sights and we checked out Mount Maunganui. We found a viewpoint to go see White Island in the distance, which is an active volcano, and we also had a bit of a drive around the area because my husband lived over in New Zealand for 5 years when he was younger, and this was one of the areas that he'd lived in. So it was nice to be able to drive around and see some of the schools he went to, some of the houses he used to live in, and just to visualize and see these places that he and his family had talked about. After this, we ended up driving out to the accommodation for the next night. It was just outside of a place called Puke, and it was the most gorgeous tiny home that you have ever seen. And we stayed out there just for one night, but I wish that I'd stayed longer because it was absolutely gorgeous and amazing and serene and relaxing. It had a hot tub, an outdoor fire pit, there were cows around, there was so much wildlife, the weather had turned absolutely beautiful and we were able to fully take advantage of this tiny home. This little tiny home was called Redwood Farm. We went to the supermarket before we headed out there and we got everything that we needed for the night. We had a barbecue while we were there, we did a platter and we had a couple of bottles of champagne and just enjoyed the experience. It was amazing to just chill out, have some downtime and eat some marshmallows by the fire. The next day was day 9 and we packed up to leave the tiny home and we headed to Gisborne. So this was about a 3.5-hour drive or 248 kilometers. This was another area that Ben had lived in when he was in New Zealand during his childhood. And we also had family there that we were staying with. These couple of days, we didn't plan on doing anything too crazy or touristy. We just really wanted to soak up the time that we had with the family. We went out for dinner a few times. We got some takeout. On day 10, we took a look around the town and we had a look at some of the other areas in which Ben had spent time as a kid. We went to a brewery, played some golf, and ate at some really cool, delicious places, as well as had a look around at some of the local wineries. Day 11, we were driving from Gisborne and heading to Napier and Hastings area. This was also another place where we were lucky enough to be able to stay with some more family. So that drive was 3 hours or 212 kilometers, and it was a very long, windy trip. It was all through the mountains and the hills. Having said that, it was still absolutely gorgeous and the scenery was breathtaking and the weather was amazing. Once we'd arrived that night, we went out to dinner with the family and we had dinner at this amazing Italian place. And before dinner, we went to a few different places. We went to this absolutely amazing and delicious gin bar, as well as a couple of breweries. Now, day 12 was all about sightseeing. So we were staying in Hastings and we ended up going out to our family's beach house in the morning and having some breakfast down at a local cafe. And then after that, we went to the Elephant Hill Winery, which was absolutely gorgeous. And we got a tasting bar, as well as a bit of a platter. We then headed off and had a look at a few other wineries. We also went to one called Trinity Hill, which we ended up purchasing a few bottles that we brought home. And it was really, really nice to be able to come home and enjoy the wine that we purchased while we were over there. And we did go to a couple of other places as well. I just can't remember the names of them. We also went for a drive and a walk around Napier to have a look at some of the Art Deco architecture in the area, which is what Napier is famous for. It was such a quaint, gorgeous city, and I can't wait to go back again one day and do some more exploring. Now for day 13, we drove from Napier to Palmeston North. This was about a 2.5 hour drive or 182 kilometers. We stayed at the Central Square Hotel that night and we went out to an amazing Thai restaurant for dinner. We had a walk around the city and got some gelato for dessert. On day 14, we got up and we went and explored the Rugby Museum. This is something that Ben had always wanted to do, as he's always been a huge rugby fan. After this, we drove from Palmeston North to Wellington. This was a 2-hour drive or 140 kilometers. We stayed at the Intercontinental Hotel right in the city and we went out and got some dinner and did a little bit of shopping. We had to go and purchase a couple of warmer jackets because the further south we got, the colder it was getting, and we realized that what we packed just wasn't going to cut it. We also took the Wellington cable car up to the top of the hill, and we also wandered around the botanical gardens, which were absolutely beautiful. On day 15, we spent the whole day in Wellington and we went to the Te Papa Museum, and we also went to the Wellington Zoo where I got to do a meerkat encounter experience. It doesn't matter where we are or what we do. If I find some kind of wildlife park or zoo, I'm always up for it, and I just love going and animal watching. On day 16, we caught the ferry from Wellington to Picton. Now this was about a 3.5 hour ferry ride, but the process of actually loading up and unloading at the other end, I reckon it was probably about a 6-hour process in total. So we didn't really do much this day. Once we arrived in Picton, we went and grabbed some dinner and we checked into our accommodation for the night, which was at the Harbour View Motel. Day 17, we were driving from Picton to Christchurch. This was a 4.5 hour drive or 340 kilometers. It was an absolutely beautiful scenic drive. We went along the coastline and saw some gorgeous like rock formations on one side, and then the other side was just beautiful ocean. And then we started to see the first sights of snow-capped mountains, which for me was super exciting because I was really looking forward to finally seeing some snow. We arrived in Christchurch and checked into our accommodation, which was the Whitewood Suites. Now this was really nice accommodation. Once again, it had a washer and a dryer, so we were able to get some more washing done along the way. And we went out to dinner that night to Little High Eatery, and we also went and checked out the Riverside markets, which was so much fun. And we found this really cool donut place, and we probably ate way more than we should, and we got some gelato, and it was just a really yummy food evening. At the Little High Eatery, we had a really yummy pizza, and I got some of the most delicious dumplings that I've ever eaten in my entire life. Day 18 was all about exploring Christchurch. Now, there were reports that they were expecting a lot of rain over the next few days, so we headed out to the Willowbank Wildlife Park that morning before the weather set in. This was such a cool, fun experience. We fed the animals, we went in and we were able to actually see some kiwi birds, and we had lunch at the cafe. and we bought some souvenirs and we just had such a fun time. We were out there for about 3 hours and then it started to rain, so we thought we'd head back into the city where we went to do an indoor activity and we visited Quake City. This was also a really interesting experience where we got to learn about the history of Christchurch and learn a bit more about earthquakes and how it has impacted the region. That night we went to one of the most delicious restaurants of the trip called Strawberry Fair. It's really well known for their desserts, and oh my gosh, they were not wrong. The desserts were absolutely huge and tasty. When we got there, they asked us if we were just there for dessert or whether we wanted a full meal. We were like, no, we want a full meal. And then when the dessert came out, we understood why people might really just go there for dessert. But it was super yummy, and I would highly recommend checking it out if you do go there. So day 19, we were driving from Christchurch to Lake Tekapo. This was going to take us 3 hours and was about 225 kilometers. Little did we know that the rain that had happened turned out to be a 1 in 100 year rain event, and most of the major roads were closed off, and we got detour after detour. It was a slow trip, and it ended up taking us about 6 hours to get to where we needed to go. There was bridges washed away, there was rock slides and landslides over the road, and it turns out that we actually found out that once we got to Tekapo, we turned the news on and we looked at the area that we'd just driven through. The road was like washed away, and it got closed, and there was no way that if we had have left like maybe half an hour to an hour later, we would not have got through. Because the weather was quite awful, or when we actually got to Tekapo, the clouds were sitting so low we weren't able to even actually see any of the beautiful scenery. So that night we went out and got some burgers from a place called Our Dog Friday. We stayed at the Lake Tekapo Motel and Holiday Park, and we just had a cozy night in watching TV and eating our burgers. The next morning we got up and the weather had cleared up, so the rain had stopped. There was still some cloud cover, but that cloud had lifted and we were actually able to see the beautiful views of Lake Tekapo with the snow-capped mountains. We went and checked out the Good Shepherd Church and had a good look around the town, and then we were off to Mount Cook. And on the way, we stopped off at Lake Bukaki as well. So it was about 1.5 hours from Tekapo to Mount Cook, which was about 120 kilometers. When we got to Mount Cook, we checked into our accommodation for the night, which was the Oroki Court Motel. We originally had a scenic helicopter flight booked for that afternoon, but due to weather conditions, it was cancelled and we had to wait till the next morning to see whether or not it was going to go ahead. So to make sure we made the most of our time, we went and checked out the Blue Pools, and we climbed up what felt like the biggest hill that I've ever climbed up, and I was so exhausted. But when we got to the top, it was Tasman Glacier Lookout, and it was absolutely beautiful and totally worth completely exhausting myself over, because the views were just breathtaking. Once we finished there, we went and checked out the Sir Edmund Hillary Alpine Centre, and this was full of lots of history and facts about the region, which was super interesting, and there were so many things to look at and do there. That night we went to the Hermitage Hotel for dinner, and we did a buffet style meal, and we ate way more than we should have, but it was totally worth it, and the view was absolutely epic because it didn't matter where you looked, you could see Mount Cook right out the window. Now on day 21, we woke up, I opened the curtains, and the clouds had completely cleared, and for the first time I fully saw Mount Cook. I whacked a jacket on and I ran outside, and I just stood there in awe and looked around at the mountains that were just surrounding me from every single direction. I called up the tour company that was doing our helicopter flight, and they confirmed that the flight was going ahead. So we packed up our bags and got ourselves ready, and we went out to the Oroki airport, and we went on a helicopter tour and we landed on the Tasman Glacier. This was such an amazing experience. It was probably the highlight of our whole trip. When I think about the holiday, this experience just was absolutely top notch, and nothing has compared to it. So the helicopter ride itself was probably about 10 to 15 minutes each way, and it flew over and around like the peak of Mount Cook, and it landed on the Tasman Glacier, where we will be able to get out of the helicopter and actually walk around on the glacier. And it was just white and blue. There was nothing else out there. It was just breathtaking. And to actually be able to be standing on the glacier was just the most surreal experience. Now, after this, we had planned on doing the 3-hour return Hooker Valley track walk. Once again, this was also just the most amazing experience and the best thing. It was a long walk, but it was totally worth it, and it was relatively easy, and you got to cross a few swing bridges, and then when you arrived you got to see some like icebergs at the base of Mount Cook, and it was just another absolutely serene experience. So when we returned from that walk, absolutely exhausted, we jumped in the car and we headed to Wanaka. This was about a 2.5 hour drive, or 207 kilometers. That night we stayed at the Edgewater Hotel, which was like a little apartment, and it was a corner room, and it was absolutely beautiful. It had a bathtub, it had a kitchenette, and it had a really nice comfortable bed with the best view of Lake Wanaka. We had dinner at the restaurant there that night, and we had the best lamb that we've had on the whole trip. It was like a braised lamb dish, and it was super delicious. When we woke up on day 22, we went for a walk, and we ended up going to see that Wanaka tree, and it really was a really cool thing to see just this single standalone tree sitting there in the water with the amazing lake behind it, which then had the snow-capped mountains behind it again, which was absolutely beautiful. So we did the touristy thing and we took heaps of pictures, and then after this we headed to the Wanaka lavender farm, and we wandered around because we knew that there was some animals there, and unfortunately there was no actual lavender flowering, so we didn't get to see like the big fluffy purple lavender fields that I was hoping to see, but we did still get some amazing pictures and got to pet some really cute and have some fun with the animals. And we tried some cool lavender infused produce. So we tried the lavender infused ice cream, and we also tried the lavender infused chocolate. From here we were headed to Queenstown. So that was a 1 hour drive, or about 70 kilometers. There are different ways that you can get there, so make sure you check out your Google Maps and work out what the best way for you is. So we were there for a few nights, and we stayed at the Oaks Shore Hotel. We had the most amazing huge apartment that overlooked Lake Wakatipu. When we arrived, we explored the town. We of course couldn't resist. We went and had a famous Ferg burger, which was pretty tasty, and then we went next door and we tried Ferg Bakery, and we got really tasty cream buns. We did a little bit of shopping. I may have purchased my first Louis Vuitton handbag, and then we went to a really yummy steak restaurant called Prime for dinner. Now day 23 was all about the adventure. We went jet boating, which was the biggest thrill ever, and like had my heart racing the whole time. And then we went on the Skyline gondola to get up to the top of Roy's Peak, and had absolutely epic views that looked out over Queenstown. And then after that we went luging, which is, they're kind of like sled things that go down a hill, and then there's like a little chairlift that you just kind of keep like going up and down. It was really fun. I didn't do the harder track, but Ben did. But yeah, it was fun, and I really knew that it's something that I wanted to do again. And then we went paragliding. So this was not planned, it just happened. We saw the little booth there while we were in the cafe having something to drink. We saw all these like parachutes coming down and we were like, oh my gosh, what is that? We need to do it, we need to try it. So we did. We went and we booked our tickets, and about an hour later we were running off the top of a cliff and paragliding down over Queenstown. And then that night we went to a really yummy Italian restaurant called Ferry's for dinner. Now on day 24 we wanted to explore the whole region a little bit more. So we jumped in the car and headed to Arrowtown. It was such a cute, quaint little town, and it had like a real like mining, old school, like gold town kind of vibe to it. We went and had some lunch at the bakery, and then we went to the Remarkables sweet store and we picked up so much candy and fudge. Oh my gosh, the fudge. Definitely recommend it. We ended up buying a lot of this and taking it home and giving it to people as gifts. It was so tasty. We also went to this cool little wine bar where you can actually pay for like tastings on tap and have a little card, and you walk around and you like swipe it and you put your wine glass under, and it kind of like just spits out like a little tasting, and you get to try it, and then you can work out whether or not you want to buy something. After Arrowtown we headed out to Glenorchy. So the weather wasn't amazing, but we decided to go anyway, and I'm so glad we did. We went and saw the famous Glenorchy boat shed, and the scenery of the drive out there as well as when you were there was absolutely epic and breathtaking. And I would love to go back and do it again on a day that wasn't so cloudy, but gosh, I cannot even imagine it being any more beautiful than what we already saw. Now day 25, we packed the car up again and we drove from Queenstown to Dunedin. So this was a 3.5 hour drive, or 280 kilometers. That night we stayed at the Victoria Hotel, and when we checked in we got really lucky and we got upgraded to the most expensive suite that they have there. I'm not sure how it happened, but it did, and it was amazing. It had this like gorgeous marble all the way through it. It had a kitchenette and a lounge room and this epic bedroom and the bathtub, and it was just such a nice little surprise that had happened, and we really enjoyed that experience. So we had a little bit of a wander around Dunedin. So we did get there late in the afternoon, so we didn't get to see too much of it, but we had a look around and saw some of the churches and checked out some of the architecture. And that night we went to a rugby game. So this was something that I was really excited about, because I've never seen rugby before, and I thought, what better place to see my first ever rugby game than in New Zealand. Now on day 26, we drove from Dunedin to Invercargill. So this was about 2.5 hours, or 204 kilometers. We decided to take the scenic route so we could stop along the way and see some of the sights. So we stopped off at Nugget Point to see these cool like rocks that were just like poking up out of the water, and it had all these like birds and stuff flying around it, and it was just a really beautiful view. And we also stopped at Maunganui Falls. I don't know if I'm butchering these names. If I am, I'm truly sorry. This was just a short walk from the road down to the falls themselves, and it was just super like tropical vibes and really pretty waterfalls. When we arrived at Invercargill, we checked into our accommodation for the night, which was the Quest. We had a little bit of a wander around the city and we tried to look for some activities to do, but it turns out that it was a long weekend and everything was closed. So we didn't really get to actually do much in the way of touristy things or visit places. We ended up just getting some pizza and sitting in our room and binge watching some Office on Netflix. Now day 27, we drove from Invercargill to Milford Sound. So this was about 3.5 hours, or 270 kilometers. Before we started our journey, we made the trip down to a place called Bluff, which is New Zealand's most southern point of the country. We stopped off at Tianu for lunch, and then we entered the Fiordland National Park, and we got to start taking in some of that breathtaking scenery. And we stopped off at Mirror Lakes and took about 100 photos and just enjoyed the serenity. That night we stayed at the Milford Sound Lodge in a mountain view cabin, which was so quaint and cozy. If you're going out there, I would highly recommend actually taking the time and spending that bit of money to stay out there the night. We had a delicious dinner at the Milford Lodge Cafe restaurant. I can't remember what it was called. Now on day 28, we went on a boat cruise tour on Milford Sound. This was epic. The sun was out, there was no rain, although I hear Milford Sound in the rain is absolutely beautiful as well. We had our little packed paper bag lunches and we just sat up on the top deck and took it all in. We also booked the tour that included a underwater observatory experience, which was also really cool, and I would definitely recommend it if that option is available to you. Once we got off the boat, we went back to our accommodation for the night and we were switching to one of the riverside chalets at the Milford Sound Lodge. I thought the night before was epic, but this was beyond epic. You could see the gorgeous mountains, you were right by the river, you could hear the stream trickling, you could see kea birds and wekas walking around everywhere, and it was just the most cozy, amazing experience, and I cannot wait to go back there again one day. That night we also went to the Milford Lodge restaurant for dinner, but we stayed in our room for a bit and we made a platter and we enjoyed some wine. On day 29, we checked out of our accommodation and we went and parked the car down at the Milford foreshore, and we did a little bit of a walk around just to take in those last few moments of being in this absolutely gorgeous place. Then we got in the car and we headed back to Queenstown. So this was another 3.5 hour drive, or 288 kilometers. We arrived at our accommodation for the night, which was the Hilton Resort. We checked in and then we decided to have a low-key evening, and we went and had some cocktails and pizza at the restaurant. Now day 30, we were in Queenstown for the rest of our time there. So we went and played some golf at the Frankton Golf Course. We ate some gelato, we did some more exploring of Queenstown. We went shopping and we had dinner at a really tasty restaurant called Blue Lagoon. Now day 31, I had pre-booked us a 3-hour spa experience at the Onsen Hot Pools. So we had an hour soak in a Serenity tub overlooking Skipper's Canyon with a glass of wine in hand in a cedar wood hot tub, and we just took it all in. And then after this, we went over to the massage rooms and we had a 2-hour massage and facial, and it was just absolutely divine and relaxing. Then after this, I spontaneously went and booked a thrill-seeking adventure, and I did the canyon swing at Skipper's Canyon. This was something that I always thought I wanted to do, but I didn't know whether or not I would actually be able to do it. But when I heard that they had availability, I jumped at the opportunity and I booked it. I faced my fears and I had the best time ever. There wasn't enough room for us both to do it, so Ben wasn't as keen as I was, but he was more than happy to let me do it, and this took up the rest of that day. Now day 32, we changed hotels for the final time. We wanted to go out on a bang for the rest of our trip, so we booked the last 2 nights at the Spire Hotel, which is right in the heart of Queenstown, and it's within walking distance to everything, and it has got the most gorgeous fancy rooms with the most amazing helpful staff, and it was just next level experience and the best possible way for us to finish off what was the most amazing holiday of our entire lives. So once we checked in here, we returned to the rental car and we were going to spend the rest of our trip in Queenstown on foot. We went to Cookie Time and had some deliciously fresh, fresh cookies, and we also got some really yummy thick shakes. They were super sickly sweet, but totally worth it. We did some more exploring around Queenstown. We went to the Below Zero Ice Bar and we got all kitted up in our little Eskimo gear, and we drank out of our ice glasses and we sat, I think it was like in a sleigh, like a sleigh carved out of ice, and everything in the bar was 100% ice, and it was just a really cool experience. No pun intended. That night we booked in to go back up to the top of the skyline on the gondola, and we booked a buffet dinner experience. So we went up a little bit earlier and we did some nighttime luging, which is really, really cool to do it and look out over Queenstown and see all the amazing, beautiful lights. And we sat by the window and we drank cocktails, and then we went and had a really, really yummy dinner. Now, day 33 was our last full day in Queenstown. It was pretty miserable weather again, and we decided to do things that were more indoors. So we went to a place called Time Zone and we played some, I think they were like Xbox games where we were like car racing, and we went and played some glow in the dark mini golf. Went back to Ferg Bakery, and then we visited the Kiwi Birdlife Park where we got up close and personal with kiwi birds, and they were right there in front of you. It was amazing. I had seen them when we were at the wildlife park in Christchurch, but from a distance and only the outline and the shadows. So to be able to be so close to these birds and actually see them and learn about them was a really, really cool way to finish the holiday off with a bang. We did a little bit more shopping, and then we went to a really, really yummy pizza place called Winnie's, and we went and finished off and picked up a few last souvenirs and gifts that we were purchasing for people. And then we just had a quiet night back in the hotel room, and then had a last dinner that night back at Prime Restaurant, which is the restaurant we went to the first night we were in Queenstown. And day 34, we got up, we packed our bags, and we had to consolidate everything that we had got or purchased or made a mess of over the past 5 weeks, and somehow work out how to cram all back into our bags and make sure that each bag was under 30 kilos. And then once we did this, we organised a car service to come pick us up, and we went to the Queenstown airport where we flew home. So we flew home from Queenstown, we flew to Sydney, and then from Sydney we flew to Adelaide. Now for the cost breakdown. So for the total cost of the trip, including everything, we spent $25,512. Now let's see how we broke that down into each category. So the cost of the car rental and the ferry was $1,365, and that was for 30 days of car hire. We spent $559 on fuel and did over 5,000 kilometers. We spent $1,997 on flights. These flights were just the ones to get us to and from New Zealand. They did not include any of the activity flights that we did. We spent $5,700 on accommodation. We spent $168 on our phone and internet. So when we arrived in New Zealand, we purchased prepaid New Zealand SIM cards to give us 50 gigabytes of data each and enough calls and texts to last us for the 5 weeks that we were going to be there for. We spent $5,030 on shopping. Now, over $3,000 of this was a splurge from me, where I purchased a Louis Vuitton handbag and a Louis Vuitton purse. So if you take that out, we only spent a couple of $1,000s on other spending money, which was for gifts for people, jackets that we decided that we needed, along with a few other little bits and pieces along the way. We spent $5,700 on food, $500 on other forms of transport and parking, so Ubers, taxis, and parking meters, and we spent $4,502 on all of the activities that we did. So that's it, guys. I really, really hope that you found this video informative and it gave you a bit of an idea about an itinerary for yourself if you are planning to go to New Zealand. And it also gave you an idea on what kind of costs that you can expect. If you want a little bit more information on exact costs of things, feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to share more information about individual costs of things on our trip. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you can know when I am posting more videos. Until next time, guys, bye!